Hello shrimp farm, hello beautiful people, welcome back to Mark Shrimp Tanks. What we're going to do today guys is I'm going to explain to you how do you know basically when your shrimp tank is ready to add shrimp, because I get asked this question all the time. It's basically like every second video. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to cover what the actual cycle is really fast. We're going to cover the things that you will need to test for your cycle. We're going to explain the differences between different setups, because you have inert setups, you have active substrates, and then you have, I'm going to call this a mature setup, or one that you make from your tanks in your room, because yeah, I did it a few weeks ago and people were asking me how I was able to add shrimp so fast, right? So we're going to describe, we're going to go into detail, and we're going to tell you how this all works. Let's basically go over the basics of shrimp keeping. What is the aquarium cycle, right? So the aquarium cycle, guys, is basically a process where there is a cycle. That's why it's called a cycle, right? Where something is produced and then something else grabs it and then converts it to something else, right? So these things that I'm calling something else are chemicals, right? So you have ammonia, you have nitrite, and you have nitrate. But these are the basic ones that everybody knows for what is this cycle, right? So ammonia is what is produced when stuff goes off in the tank, right? So for example, you have a dead shrimp, right? It starts to rot. It will produce ammonia, right? And then something else will come along, some type of bacteria, right? And it will grab it and it will process this bacteria into nitrite, right? And then something else will come along, because this nitrite will actually be processed into something else. And then this bacteria will actually make a new element called nitrate, right? I'm going to give you some tips on what test kits you buy, because you're going to need to actually buy some test kits to know how your tank is actually cycling. Right, so the ones I would go with, guys, is first one off would be your ammonia test kit. It's really important, right? You can't put shrimp into a tank that has ammonia in it, or they will be kaput. Right, so you want your ammonia test kit. I would go with the nitrite test kit, because nitrite is still quite toxic. It's not as bad as ammonia, but it's still very toxic. It will kill your shrimp outright as well. And then I would go for a nitrate test kit, right? So it has different toxicity levels depending what the shrimp is and the setup is and all that kind of good stuff. But then, guys, you should also consider buying other test kits, and these would include a GH test kit, which is a measure of your general hardness. It measures calcium and magnesium. And then you would probably want something like a pH test kit. Right, so there you have that's maybe 6 test kits, and from them you'd get a good understanding of how your tank cycle is going on. Am I washing a glass here or a window? Or, God damn it. Right, so let's get on to the next part. We're going to discuss the different types of tank setup, because the nitrogen cycle is different for every different type of tank. Let's talk about a tank I did up here 2 weeks ago, and this was a tank that I made from other parts of equipment in my room, right? Because I had questions on this. People were saying, Mark, how can you add shrimp straight away to a tank like this that hasn't been cycled? Well, I'm actually adding a filter that has already been cycled. My filter was cycled, right? So it's able to deal with the waste that comes into the filter through the filtration. The other stuff that we put in there was basically plant material and a piece of wood, right? And when you add plants and wood and all this kind of good stuff into a tank, you're actually transferring bacteria with it to your tanks at the same time. I don't know what I'm doing here with my hands, but you're transferring bacteria to the tank at the same time. As long as your filtration is good, guys, and your water is aged, that's really important when you do this kind of thing, when you make a new tank from an old equipment. As long as your water is aged, you can add your shrimp straight away. Okay, let's quickly touch on the bare bones tank setup. I'm pointing to here, this green mess over this side. This is a bare bones tank. Yeah, you've seen my other bare bones tanks here. This is an active soil tank. For it specifically, guys, you can get away with a 1 week cycle, right? And you only get away with that because there is a special ingredient that we added to the tank, which adds lactobacillus to the water, which helps with their cycle, right? And it produces mycelium and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, my shrimp are thriving right here. So proof is in the pudding. I'm not showing you though. That's not proof, is it? Oh my God. But yeah, this system works fantastically for a bare bones setup. And the reason it works, guys, is because you're putting minimal amount of ammonia via the active soil into the tank in the first place, right? And the reason that is good is because if anything goes wrong, like it's not a suitable substrate or whatever else, you're actually able to change it out really fast. Okay, shrimp farm, we're going to talk about active soils in general here because that is a different type of setup from the one that we just described with the bare bones setup. Typically when people use an active soil, they'll put a thicker bed in, and with thicker beds you want to give it more time because there's more ammonia, right? It takes longer. It's not just as simple. You can't just rush things and make it work faster. I've tried it in the past and it just doesn't work, guys. So yeah, take your time. For active soils, I would suggest if you use a bottled bacteria, you could maybe pull it off within a month if you're using a thick bed, right? But ideally, guys, you want to give it as much time as possible. So you're talking, I don't know, 6 weeks to 8 weeks to fully cycle an active soil tank. Okay, let's talk about inert soils because I have an inert substrate tank here. And most of you guys that will be watching this video will be after this information. Right, for cycling a tank like this, right, this normally would take 3 to 4 weeks to cycle a tank like this, right? And as we've talked about before, when you have a pH that is not low, the cycle time is faster, right? So the closer to a neutral pH that you can get the water, the faster your cycle time will be in general, right? Because there's more bacteria in a neutral pH water system than a soft water system. So this tank, for example, I set this one up in one single week with cecum stability, right? And after the week was finished, guys, I added more than 100 blue dreams to this tank, and you can see this tank is absolutely thriving. How did this one work? How was I able to do it so fast? Well, I over-filtered the tank here. I put my hands in the right way, in the right place, and I added a ton of plants in the beginning. I'm not sure a lot of people know this, but plants can actually absorb ammonia as well. Did I say that right? Ammonia. They can absolutely take out ammonia from the water as well. So it's always good practice to add quite a bit of plants to your tank and a setup like this in the beginning. Can you see them all here? There's bazillions of them. Look at them go. So that is how I do it with this type of tank. And guys, we're going to go into some tips now on that I think you should follow that will help you a lot. Alright guys, we talked about using old filtration and whatever else before, old plants and whatever you can add to your tanks. If you have other tanks in your house or your room and you want to add them to your fresh tank, it will cut your cycle down a lot. If you can do that, please do that because it does help quite. It does make quite a difference. The other thing I would suggest to you guys is try and be patient with this kind of stuff because it's one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is that they just rush things. And a lot of the times it's not what you think it is that's killing the shrimp. I'll give you an example of this. So you have someone that is new, they set up an active soil tank and they've waited, Mark said 6 to 8 weeks to cycle this tank. So they did this, right? And then they tested, they did their tests, the water tests and stuff, and they were all okay, right? And then they added the shrimp to the tank and then within a couple of days the shrimp were dead. And then the first thing that they would blame it on is the tank not being cycled properly. Well, if you had actually drip acclimated those shrimp in the first place, then the shrimp probably would have survived. Even with a tiny amount of ammonia, they probably would have survived, right? So the slower that you can do this, guys, the slower that you can cycle the tank, specifically with active substrates, the better the shrimp will be off in the long run, right? So think of the story with the turtle and the hare, with how the hare exhausted itself and basically died. I know there's like different variations, but the tortoise was patient, just took its time, plodded along, and it got there in the end. That's the way you want to do it with shrimp tanks. I often have active soil tanks in here set up for months at a time before I even add shrimp, and it's not because I'm lazy, it's just because I know that it works best if you just take your time and do it properly. Before we go, guys, I want to give you one more tip, and that is use your eyebolics, right? Get out your magnifying glasses or your binoculars if you're as blind as I am. And look at your tank. Look for signs of life, right? Because if you can see certain signs of life in your tank, then it's a good sign that it might be suitable for your shrimp, right? So let me give you an example. You get your magnifying glass and you're looking at the glass and you see a little thing, right, that looks like a little cyclops. It's actually called a cyclops. But other people call it copepods. If you see cyclops in your tank and you see lots of them darting around in the glass and they have little egg sacs and whatever else, that is a very, very good sign that your tank is ready for shrimp, because cyclops are much, much smaller than shrimp, even the babies, and they're probably more susceptible to things like ammonia poisoning and all that kind of stuff because they're so small. And that in itself is a really good thing to see as well, because these little small creatures, if they're surviving on the glass, it means that your baby shrimp will probably survive as well.